How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. Fist in the air while clutching the cross, indicative that the plot has been lost, indicative of not counting the cost. You claim to believe while trying to floss, with ill-gotten gains, extortion at best, demanding that man be made to caress your ego and pride, or suffer arrest, or be paid a visit by the IRS. Ain't none of that Christian, in fact it's Christless. How dare you sashay and say with your chest that you love the poor, but yet you outsource benevolence to the state? Of course. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. Yeah. Who would've thought that blasphemy pays? Scratch itch ears with iatrogenic blaze. The social gospel just can't penetrate all of the sin we each propagate. Redistribution cannot pay the wage, and no social justice can never repay. We only end up with a nation of slaves, rebuilding the Tower of Babel for days. For all have fallen and destined for graves, but oh thank the Lord that Jesus Christ saves. Is gospel acceptable wage for our debt when we look for others we're spiritually dead? How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor. How are you the light when you don't have any fire? You can't be the bride if it's another you desire. How are you the salt when you have clearly lost your flavor? Your flavor.
Hello, everybody, and thank y'all for joining this live stream. I'm not sure if y'all can hear me. This is actually an impromptu live. I did promise you all that I would do more live streams, and so what better situation to go live about than this one involving y'all's favorite Whoopi Goldberg and her claim that Black history is being torn down all over the country in light of the Trump administration. And so this is a topic that I wanted to cover because it extends beyond The View. I know a lot of you all, if you watch me, you probably don't watch The View, but it extends beyond The View. I think it speaks to a broader issue that is going on in this country as of late, as it pertains to more and more information coming out with respect to American history. And so some of the things that you will hear tonight, you've heard me say before, but it's all the reason why. I mean, because we see things coming out on a daily basis. We see things that celebrities, that politicians, that scholars are saying on a daily basis. Because really what's happened is history has been interpreted in a certain way. That interpretation has been accepted as fact in our public square, in our public institutions. It is the one that politicians subscribe to and peddle, irrespective of if they are in the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. I told myself that I won't talk about Martin Luther King tonight because I've been talking about him for the last 2 years in the making of the MLK Project, but I guess it's unavoidable because here I go, already breaking my rule, and we're not even 5 minutes into the live stream. But let's take Martin Luther King, for example. When you look at Martin Luther King and how he is talked about by both Republican and Democrat presidents, ever since the passage of the MLK holiday under Reagan in the late 80s, every Republican, every Democrat president since then has basically signed legislation or did something, some symbolic, some ritualistic thing to double down, triple down, quadruple down, and to reaffirm America's commitment to the vision of Martin Luther King. That's why it's necessary to do the MLK Project. That's why it's necessary for John Doyle to do what he's doing over at the Blaze. That's why it's necessary for Matt Walsh to do what he's doing over at the Daily Wire. That's why the late Charlie Kirk, it was necessary for him to do what he did at TPUSA. Because, there is this, people are beginning to understand and realize, and lest I forget, Vince Everett Ellison and what he's doing in his own right with his podcast, with his books and his films. Can't forget Vince Everett Ellison. But people are beginning to understand, this thing is is nonpartisan. This agenda to Sovietize America, to globalize America, as it were, is nonpartisan, right? And we as a society are captured by this narrative. And it's through that capturing that this revisionist history is able to perpetually be used as both sword and shield to get Americans to comply and to acquiesce to this globalist Sovietization of not only our country, but the world in incremental ways. Some folks want to do it in a fast-paced way. A lot of your younger folks who have been propagandized into believing that the sky is falling with respect to climate change, with respect to a lot of things that's been taught today in our public school system and in our private schools as well, for that matter. So there's this narrative that youngsters are buying into, and they are being pumped with fear on one hand, and then on the other hand, they're being pumped with this kind of virtue signaling vigor that unless they take to the streets, unless they use their social media, unless they do whatever virtue signaling thing they can do, we will never turn the tide of climate change. We will never turn the tide of racism. We will never turn the tide of the patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia and all the rest. So our kids are basically being conditioned to be activists, to be afraid on the one hand, but to be active on the other hand. Our schools are becoming these kind of mobilizing institutions for this agenda, right? And so you have a lot of people who are coming out and who are pushing back against it, and rightly so. And they're doing so with receipts. They're doing so with archival evidence and information that proves definitively that all of what we've been taught is a lie. So this information that we're sharing tonight, us dissecting Whoopi Goldberg's comments, is not just, look at, it's the View doing what the View always does. It's the View with all of its leftist women and then a moderate Republican doing what they always do, complaining and moaning and belly aching about nothing. No. It's important to talk about because this is something that we see far too often, right? So J.D. Vance just wrote a book called Communion or something like that. I'm not sure what the book is called, but he just wrote a book. My thinking is that he's gearing up for a presidential run in 2028. This tends to happen when a politician is getting ready to place their bid for president. They write a book, they go on a speaking tour to talk about the book, to promote the book, and to basically lay out the case for why they should be president of the United States. You'll remember that, Barack Obama, he wrote the book Dreams from My Father in the 90s and spent most of the decade promoting the book. But then when he decided to throw his hat in for president in 2008, he released a book called Change We Can Believe In, or Hope We Can Believe In. I forget the name of the book, but this is something that politicians routinely do. So in order to promote his book, he went on to The View. The View was one of the stops that J.D. Vance made. And of course, because it is The View, and because they have a very leftist audience, a very leftist female audience, they, of course, came with their daggers, ready to criticize and scrutinize the Trump administration by way of J.D. Vance. And one of the accusations that Whoopi Goldberg, along with Sunny Hostin and others, were making was that, Trump is tearing down Black history, right? That's the claim. Trump is tearing down Black history. This is an atrocity. This is something that we should all be concerned about. And not only is it a threat to Black history, it's a threat to Black people, right? That's how it's always framed. Folks, this is a tried and true Marxist tactic, right? Because these are people who spent years studying human behavior, studying the cognitive sciences, the social sciences, figuring out how to propagandize the public into moving in the direction they wish it to go. And one of the things that they figured out is that to the extent that you're able to politicize an issue, to the extent that you're able to sensationalize and galvanize an issue, and find a way to make it personal for people, you're well on your way, right? So in other words, to attack what they call Black history is to attack Black people. To say that I don't like seeing the homophobe or the LGBT trans flag plastered everywhere. To say that is to say that you hate gay people. You see where I'm going with this? They politicize, sensationalize an issue. And to the extent that you show any kind of distaste for what it is they're doing, for the issue that they're putting forth, you're all of a sudden framed as somebody who hates the people that thing is supposed to represent. And so when we talk about history, right? History is a very intricate thing. There's a lot of moving parts happening all at once. Some of the things are connected, others aren't, but a lot of it is interconnected, and it deals not with just something that happened in a certain period, but there's always back history that happened as well. It's a very convoluted web history, right? So really what it boils down to is, what is one's interpretation of history? Marxists have figured this out a very long time ago. And this is why in the 1970s, they were very hell-bent on flooding the colleges and universities. You'll remember that after the election of Richard Nixon in 1968, one of the things that he said, and of course we cover this in the MLK Project, is, all of these radicals that you see rioting and protesting and burning things, this is not the future of America, is what he said. He said that this won't be the future of America, that there's more youngsters of peace who have good heads on their shoulders than there are these kind of hippie type people that are destroying the country. So they won't win. They are in the minority. This is what Nixon said. Boy, was he wrong. right? Because it doesn't necessarily need to result or manifest into a bunch of blue-haired, feminists in order to, uh, that doesn't have to happen in order for America to have lost its way. You can have suburbanites, you can have white collar people, and America is still a lost country because these people have figured out a way to get into the institutions and so skew the narrative that even though you maintain, for what all intents and purposes looks like, standard middle class values in terms of the way you look and the aesthetics and so on and so forth, you could very well hold Marxian values without realizing that they are in fact Marxian values, right? If I need to slow down, just write in the comment section, chat, slow down, and give more elaboration of what you're talking about. But anytime you look at exit polls for any election, right, you have somebody who is running for office who basically is the epitome of socialist ideology. Take James Tallarico, for example, running for Senate here in Texas. Is the epitome or is the embodiment of Marxist ideology. That's all he ever talks about. He doesn't call it Marxism, but if you listen to what he says and if you know what Marxism is, that's exactly what he's doing. If you look at James Tallarico-esque people who have run for office in the past and have won, or who have managed to, secure a large portion of the electorate, and you see who voted for these people, you'll find white suburban women. You will find, people who are well positioned in the so-called middle class, right? Not your blue-haired people. You'll find them, that's to be sure, but you also find people who aren't quote unquote radical. So my point in saying that is, yes, you had your kind of thunderstorm of hippies in the 1970s, early 70s, but the notion or the idea that their dress, their garb, their unkept hair, and all the rest of it, that would be widespread, and that was a thing that Nixon was fighting against, couldn't be further from the truth. Because what Nixon failed to realize is that they don't necessarily have to look like the hippie in order to function like the hippie. Because the hippie basically cleaned himself up, followed the instructions of the likes of Saul Alinsky, who wrote the book Rules for Radicals, told them to clean themselves up, told them to cut their hair, told them to secure positions in America's institutions, and to radicalize the nation through incremental means. And that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happened. And so it became important to basically take history and flip it on its head to produce a Marxian or socialist interpretation of history, teach that to youngsters who are coming up through the institutions, coming up through the public school system, who will one day take jobs in the trades, who will one day take jobs in the white collar professions, who will one day take jobs in academia, so on and so forth, and who will one day be part of the electorate, who will be old enough to vote. To get in front of it and to put forth a narrative that caters to your idea of what the world should look like. And that's exactly what happened. One of the people that we mention in the MLK Project is a woman by the name of Bettina Aptheker. Bettina Aptheker, who's still alive today, by the way, and teaches at a university in California. She teaches feminist theory, among other things, is a card-carrying communist. I don't know if she still is, but she still very much holds to communist ideology. And she is not, this isn't me speculating, she herself says that one doesn't have to be a part of the Communist Party or a member of the Communist Party to hold to communist ideology or to be effective in furthering the communist agenda. She herself says this, right? It's in fact one of the more recent videos on Bettina Aptheker that you can find on YouTube right now. She's good friends with Angela Davis. She grew up alongside Angela Davis, and not only that, she was a student of W.E.B. Du Bois. The Aptheker family were good friends with the Du Bois family. Where was I going with that? So yeah, the Aptheker family were good friends with the Du Bois family. The 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, was a common meeting place for communist activity. Bettina Aptheker's father was a leader in the Communist Party USA. So somebody like Bettina Aptheker was well versed in communist ideology, communist tactics. She knew Martin Luther King. She knew Angela Davis. She knew that whole conglomerate. And she is currently teaching at a university in California. Her class is a highly sought after class there in California, right? Angela Davis is another one. I don't know if she's still a professor, but she was a longtime professor. Clarence B. Jones, Martin Luther King's longtime attorney, who was a member of the Communist Party, he and his wife, was also a professor. Like, these people got into education and they got ahead of the ball. And this interpretation of history is what is being taught to many of us today. So it's no wonder, that, one doesn't have to wonder why it is that folks on the right and the left, to some degree, accept this kind of Marxian interpretation of history, although they don't recognize it as such. They accept this Marxian interpretation of history, and you see people like, Donald Trump, who's currently the president, the Republican president before him, George W. Bush, Republican president before him, George Herbert Walker Bush, Republican president before him, Ronald Reagan, Ronald Reagan, all sing the praises to some degree of Martin Luther King, although Ronald Reagan less so. He did so kind of obligatorily because he was pressured to do it by George Herbert Walker Bush. But then, of course, you see every Democrat president who took it to a very sacrilegious degree, like they do with all their heroes. For example, a lot of you probably don't remember this, but Bill Clinton, when he was running for president in the 90s, thought so highly of FDR, who was a socialist president here in the United States for 4 terms, thought so highly of FDR that he said that when his father passed away on his deathbed, he said, "I don't believe I'm going to go to heaven. I believe that I'm going to go to Roosevelt," right? Because they saw Roosevelt as a god. So this is why it's necessary for my company, Historia Revelata, to correct the lies that we've been told about history. This is why you see more so-called influencers coming out of the woodworks, correcting a lot of the interpretation that we have of history. The problem is in the pushback, because while you would expect substantive pushback of, well, that's your interpretation, but you're missing this and that fact, right? That would be a good retort that is worthy of debate, worthy of substance, that the audience can take information from and come up with, their own conclusions as to what makes sense. But we don't get that. What we get is, you're not just attacking quote unquote Black history, which they misnomer, you're attacking Black people. For you to talk about how the civil rights movement was more detrimental to so-called Black Americans than it was beneficial, that the so-called civil rights movement was detrimental to America and the Constitution than it was beneficial. To the extent that you say such a thing, to the extent that you talk about, well, I don't believe in universal suffrage, then all of a sudden you're an enemy to Black people. Because what they've managed to do is to collapse their agenda with the identity of what it is to quote unquote be Black, which I don't even know what that means, right? So with all that being said, let's get into this clip from The View, and we'll kind of break it down as we go, shall we? So this is a 5-minute clip, and I'll be pausing it intermittently, of J.D. Vance's recent appearance on The View.
You come from a poor community.
Sure.
You know how hard it has been for people. Two things. You talk a lot about your Catholic faith, but the Catholic faith says we take in immigrants. We take in people who don't have or who are having a hard time. How do you justify both things?
So let me say first a couple things, Whoopi. So number one, the book is actually way less political than you might think if you were just watching this, because obviously we're getting into the issues of the day.
Right.
95% of the book is really not about politics. I kind of have to write about politics because I'm the vice president, but I want to answer your question.
Right.
So fundamentally, if you think about what is immigration enforcement, immigration is law enforcement. It's somebody who has broken a law. A law enforcement officer has to show up and enforce that law. Now, inherently, sometimes that process is not always going to be pretty if you capture a video clip of it, in the same way that if you arrest somebody for committing a violent or a nonviolent crime, sometimes it's not always pretty. What I'm saying is the Catholic faith is actually I think it strikes the right balance here. It says the Christian faith, I think this is true of Protestants and Catholics, that you can have borders.
Yeah.
You're allowed to enforce your borders. That means the law enforcement piece of it. But you also have to take certain precautions and certain care, okay? And again, your argument is fundamentally, Whoopi, you're saying that we don't strike the right balance. I disagree with you about how we apply that, but nobody hopefully is saying we're not allowed to have a border.
No,
what I'm saying is that in order for us to actually enforce the law, you can't set a standard that says you're not allowed to deport anyone unless they've committed a violent crime. You've got to enforce the law equally.
So
and justly.
let me do my follow-up.
You don't have to raise your
me do
hand,
my
Joy.
follow-up.
Yes, I do.
Because you were talking about people. What did Black people do to this administration that has allowed it to really stigmatize folks of color? And you know how hard it is. You have folks of color in your family.
Sure.
So when you see, you know, things, the Emmett Till stuff coming down, or them doing all kinds of removal of information of Black heroes, how does that sit with you?
Well, what exactly are you talking about, Whoopi? Because you just
I'm talking
I know
about
Emmett Till was
I
Emmett
can
Till was
tell
the
you all
kid.
the stuff. Yeah.
No, I want to know what
understand.
she's.
You don't know
I
what
wanna
I'm
respond
talking
to your
about.
actual point.
So in a lot of the museums, there's so many. You know, where they're taking down the actual history that happened in this country. Slavery happened. All kinds of stuff happened. And it seems that it has been very easy for this administration to remove that, and also to denigrate Black folks who have worked their behinds off to get this American dream.
Can y'all hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Can y'all hear me? Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello, hello. Can y'all hear me? What the? Almost cussed. Okay, I see that y'all are saying you can hear me now. I'm not sure what the heck is going on. I'm not stupid. The little mic, whenever you're muted, has a red slash through it. It never at any point had a red slash through it. This whole time, it's saying that. And not only that, I can see the audio waves every time I talk. So I'm not sure what the heck is going on with this platform and why it's anyway. So let me pause there with the clip. So the whole Whoopi Goldberg thing and her saying that this is a denigration of Black people, right? Y'all heard her say that this is a denigration of Black people. That and what she's referring to, by the way, even though she couldn't quite name anything, she couldn't give any examples of what it is she's talking about, even though JD Vance asked her, well, you know, what is it that you're talking about? She wasn't able to give any examples. So let me help her out here. What she's referring to is the fact that they are, by they, of course, the Trump administration, as well as many states around the country, are doing away with CRT and DEI. So that's what she's referring to. And that shows up in various ways. Remember, in Florida, we saw it under what's the governor's name? It escapes me. The governor of California, or I'm sorry, Florida. What's his name? How did I forget this? Maybe I'm stupid tonight. So anyway, the governor of Florida, how they are getting rid of a woke interpretation. Yeah, DeSantis. So they're getting rid of a woke interpretation of history. I don't know if they're still doing that because I don't really keep up a whole lot with Florida politics. But, you know, these are the kind of things that Whoopi is talking about. You'll see also people like D.L. Hughley, who had a huge problem with this. And notice that what they do, they say that this is a denigration of Black people. Understand what's going on here. First, they take a very liberal, a very leftist, a very Marxian interpretation of history. You'll notice this. I mean, those of you who were born in the 80s or 90s like I was born in 1990, to the extent that you have Black History Month every year, the people that they parade out in front of you, as far as Black history is concerned, which I don't believe we should have a Black History Month, but that's me. But to the extent that they parade people out in front of you, they parade activists in front of you, right? It's always activists. It's Ida B. Wells. It's Martin Luther King. It's W.E.B. Du Bois. It's on and on I can go. Langston Hughes, right? By the way, Langston Hughes wasn't just a poet. He was a political activist. Look at his poems. Look at his poem in particular, Goodbye Christ, where he is advocating for Negroes to embrace communism and to leave Christianity. These are the people that are paraded in front of you, right? And of course, you don't learn about the radical components of their careers. You learn about how they were fighting for freedom, how they were fighting for justice, how they were fighting for America to be true to what it claimed on paper, which is a line from Martin Luther King. So these are the people who are paraded. Occasionally, you get your Booker T. Washingtons and others, but they are overshadowed. Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, they are overshadowed by the plethora of activists that they parade in front of you, right? So what does this do in the mind of a youngster? What is the effect of that interpretation of so-called Black history in the mind of a youngster? What they are conditioned to do is to chalk Black history up to struggle, to the fight for equality and justice and revolution. Anytime you're scrolling through TikTok or through IG and you have these Blacktivists who are doing these reels where they are showing you 5 books you should read about Black history, they never fail to show you books by James Baldwin, to show you books about the struggle, to show you books about the revolution. Because that's what Black history is chalked up to: the revolution, the struggle. That is the interpretation of history, of Black history, that people like Whoopi Goldberg accepts. And so to the extent that you have folks like me or others or whomever say, well, no, we don't believe in that history. We don't believe in that interpretation of history. These people say that you are denigrating Black people because, once again, what they've figured out in their mind is that to attack that version of history is to attack colored people themselves. So that's what she's doing. She may not realize that on a conscious basis, but subconsciously, that's exactly what she's doing. You understand? And so I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And of course, you know, JD Vance was able to hold his own. But the reality of it is, you know, we have to deal with this question. Is the DeSantis administration in Florida, is the Trump administration in the United States, is the Abbott administration here in Texas, on and on I can go, are they doing an effective job in attacking this history? Right? And by the way, Whoopi Goldberg was radio silent in the 2010s when you saw this mass push to erase Confederate history from America, right? Confederate history is an important component of America because it deals with the fact, and this is, I'm going to give you this for free, and it might go over some of your guys' head, but we explain it at length in season 1 of the MLK Project. But when you look at what many of the Confederates were trying to do, is that they were trying to basically keep America from becoming this runaway train that it was becoming. Oh no, but it's about slavery. No. They were trying to keep America from becoming from going further off the rails as it were. Because during the debate that our founding fathers were having during the Constitutional Convention, they were trying to basically figure out what kind of country will America be. And so when you read the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, the Brutus Papers, they were grappling with this question. They were debating this question. Now that we have thrown off the tyranny from a foreign nation, what kind of country will we now be? And of course, you have people like Patrick Henry, who believed that the states should be sovereign, that we should be a lowercase u, United States, capital S of America. But individual states should have sovereignty. We should have a constitution, yes, but individual states should be sovereign. And between the ratification of the Constitution in the 1860s, you saw an ever expanding growth of the federal government that was beginning to supersede state sovereignty. And so what the Confederates were trying to do was to keep America from going too far off the rails. Now, of course, you did have politicians who did see it solely as a war to keep slaves, but that wasn't by and large. Of course, those certain individuals are the ones that Marxian interpreters of history like to hone in on and focus in on, right? They like to look at the vice president of the Confederate States and not necessarily the president of the Confederate States, Jefferson Davis, who did not believe that slavery should exist in perpetuity, right? When you read the testimonials of Confederate soldiers themselves who actually fought for the Confederate side of the war, many of them said that we didn't like slavery either. We weren't fighting for the preservation of slavery. We mentioned one such soldier, and again, season 1 of the MLK Project, you can hear the audio of him saying this in the 1930s, that he thought that slavery cast a stench on America, and that he's glad that his children don't get to grow up in a country where slavery exists. But he says that he was proud to fight for the Confederate side of the war because to him it was about states' rights, about state sovereignty. And this is a battle that would continue well past the war between the states. In fact, you can find a conversation right now on YouTube, this kind of open conversation between Martin Luther King, Whitney Young, Roy, what's his name? Roy, the president of the NAACP. I forget. How do I forget his last name? Wilkins, Roy Wilkins. Among others, and they're talking about how they don't believe that, like in this, they don't believe that we should place such high priority on individual property. They believe that individual property is an obstacle for the Negro getting his rights. This is what they believed, right? If you go to YouTube, you type in eloquent Black leaders talk about civil rights. I think that's what the title of the video is. You can find it on David Hoffman's YouTube channel. David Hoffman is also a filmmaker. He did a lot of films, documentary films for PBS in the 1980s and 1990s. So David Hoffman, type in the word eloquent, Black leaders talk about civil rights, something like that. But yeah, you can find it on David Hoffman. So anyway, watch that video. You can see people like Roy Wilkins, Martin Luther King, Whitney Young, and others talking against property rights. You could also see them talking against states' rights. In fact, it was Whitney Young. It was Roy Wilkins, actually, who said that we need to get rid of this notion of people being a citizen of their state, because a lot of people don't know this because we tend to get historical amnesia. But for a long time in this country, people identified, as far as their citizenship was concerned, with their state. Identifying with your nation was kind of an afterthought. But then, of course, as we advanced technologically, as we became a more political animal, as it were, as we began to align ourselves more with activism and so on, it became cool, it became vogue to all of a sudden identify with the nation, with the country. But that wasn't the case for a long period of time in this country. So they wanted to get rid of states' rights and to centralize all power into the federal government. This is a long fought battle that has been going on since the very inception of this country. It would come to a climactic point in the 1860s with what we know today as a Civil War. But the debate, the Cold War of the debate, has been going on for, since our birth, since the beginning of this country. It's not so much a battle that's fought out right now, because it's become kind of a settled score where everyone believes, whether they're Republican or Democrat, that I'm a citizen of the nation. I'm a citizen of America, proud to be an American. So that's kind of, took hold and it took on and has become interwoven into the fabric. But that wasn't the case for a long period of time. So where was I going with that? That was actually a little kind of detour. But to get back to the point that I was making, are people like Trump and DeSantis and Abbott and others doing a good job correcting the history, the Marxian interpretation of the history? Are they doing a good job getting to the root of the issue? We see the headlines of going after CRT, going after DEI, and all the things. But is that tantamount to getting to the root of the issue? I would argue that it is not. I would argue that it isn't. Why do you say that, Chad? Well, the reason I say that is because when it comes to affirmative action, we saw the Supreme Court case a few years ago as it pertains to affirmative action. When it comes to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, which we tend to see when it comes to hiring practices for corporations and for government jobs and so on. When it comes to critical race theory, which has to do with the way that children are educated and college students are educated, namely to look at the world through a critical lens where everything has to do with race and every decision that is made has some kind of defect or detriment to so-called people of color or intersectional people for whatever reason. So, of course, you have critical queer theory, you have critical race theory, you have critical so on and so forth. When it comes to these things, understand that these things are symptoms of the Marxian worldview. They're not the thing, they are symptoms of the thing. And so when we see the headlines that outrages everybody, how dare they go after DEI, how dare they go after CRT, how dare they go after affirmative action, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The sky is falling, it's doom and gloom, right? Understand that the outrage is not tantamount to the entire collapsing of the civil rights agenda, of the civil rights narrative, of the civil rights industry. Because the civil rights industry is, in fact, an octopus who have its tentacles all in various aspects of American civilization, of American institutions. It's a good thing that the symptoms are being gone after at this juncture. It's a good thing. But it doesn't solve all the problems. So they're making much of it, right? The fact is, when you look at Leninist theory, when you look at Leninist tactics, Lenin himself was a strong believer in 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, 2 steps forward, sometimes 5 steps backward, but then you take those strides forward again, because he understood everything in a kind of Hegelian way, in a kind of, action and reaction kind of way. And sometimes it looks like the so-called other side is gaining ground or what have you. But the idea is to change the mindset through incremental channels, right? Because if your opponent is principled in what they believe, it makes for a very tough component or opponent to defeat. However, when you control the definitions of what your opponent believes, see, now we have something. When you control the education that your opponent is receiving as a pupil, and you control the headlines, and you are able to control the degree of outrage that people have to the extent that reactionaryism happens, you can, in all effect, control the outcome of the battle. And that's what we've seen happening. Is Whoopi Goldberg conscious of this? I would argue that she isn't. She's merely regurgitating what she's, the headlines that she's seeing. As somebody pointed out to me earlier today, I posted about this whole Whoopi Goldberg situation. And there's a content creator by the name of Naisha. Let's see, what's her name? Naisha Chu. I don't know if y'all can see her, but yeah, Naisha Chu. You can follow her on Instagram. That's NYISHA. She added some nuance to my reel that I posted, where I'm basically pointing out the fact that what Whoopi Goldberg is upset about subconsciously is that the Marxian interpretation of history, which she holds to, is becoming less and less effective as a weapon, as a political weapon in the public square. And that's what she's afraid of. She's afraid of the fact that more and more people are beginning to not be controlled by their interpretation of history. No longer is it the case where you can just shout slavery, Jim Crow, and people are just going to fall into line, right? So that's the reality is that for a long period of time, they've used this kind of Marxian interpretation of history as both sword and shield. Where you can yell slavery to the extent that you don't get your way. It's a sword insofar that it gets people to acquiesce, it gets people to shut up, it gets people to fall into line. So it's a sword in that respect. but it's a shield, because to the extent that you are asked as a colored person to take responsibility, you can say, oh no, my people were slaves. We had to deal with Jim Crow. We're dealing with generational trauma. We lack generational wealth. We can't be held responsible to the same degree as everybody else. Martin Luther King himself said this. He was asked by an NBC reporter at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and the video is on YouTube, what is it about the Negro that causes him to lag so far behind compared to other immigrant groups? Martin Luther King fixed his mouth and said, well, the color of the Negro has been stigmatized by America. The Negro is the only person in America who has been a slave on American soil. So he proceeds to give all these excuses as to why Negroes are lagging behind other groups. The reality of it, the part that he don't tell you, and you can find on Patreon, I released a deleted scene from the MLK Project last night where I delve into this a little bit further. But the reality of it is the civil rights movement is what had such a detriment on the genuine progress of colored Americans. Because how else do you go from 4 out of 5 colored children being raised in a 2-parent household prior to the civil rights movement to 70+% of colored children being raised in single mother households after the civil rights movement? What Martin Luther King and his compatriots were doing, in effect, was a kind of rhetorical warfare on Negroes, a very psychological warfare, because they were complaining and moaning and belly aching about all the things that were happening to Negroes. Much of it was embellishment. Much of it was exaggeration. They were pointing outward and never thought to point inward. Of course, you had people who were pointing inward. You had Joseph H. Jackson, who wrote that, you have all these Negroes who are complaining about what other people are doing, and there's a deficiency in the responsibility that Negroes need to be taking themselves to lift themselves up by their bootstraps. King fought back against that and said, well, how do you tell a bootless man to lift himself up by his bootstraps? It's a cruel jest, says King, to tell a bootless man. Okay, so now we don't have boots all of a sudden. Got it. But you have people like Joseph H. Jackson. You have people like Booker T. Washington, who told the story of the son of a physician. The physician was treating a patient. Nothing was wrong with the patient. Nothing was wrong with the woman. But the doctor, the physician, kept telling her, yeah, something's wrong with you. You need this treatment. You need to come see me every year, right? Year after year after year after year. So the son decides he wants to go off to college and become a physician. So the father pays for his son to go off to school to become a physician. He comes back home, the son does. The father leaves town on business. And so the poor old patient comes to the son to receive her annual treatment. And upon seeing the physician's son, he's able to cure what ails her right then and there. Whenever the father comes back from his trip and finds that the patient has been healed of her ailment, the father grows irate. Why? He tells his son that the money that we've earned from treating her again and again and again is what put you through college. What is the moral of the story? The moral of the story, according to Booker T. Washington, is that you have a class of Negro intellectuals who make it a business of victimizing the Negro people again and again and again and again, telling them that they're sick and that their sickness has to do with something the white man is doing. And what that does is it makes this class of Negro intellectuals relevant, right? Because I need you, the activists, to advocate on my behalf, to go and lobby on my behalf, to make deals on my behalf, and so on and so forth. But when you realize that, actually, no, the sickness I have has to do with me and my inability to take responsibility, my inability to be a man, or my not wanting to be a man. That's what the sickness has to do with. So, of course, you have Booker T. Washington, who died in 1915, tell that story and others like it. You had people like Manning Johnson, who in the late 50s exposed Marxist propaganda, Marxist tactics, which again relies upon victimizing the Negro, telling him he's a victim, and spending no time at all talking about solutions that are not political, that doesn't require you to lobby the government, that doesn't require you to get a Democrat in office or a Republican in office, but requires what you can do with these and with this. I follow colored farmers on Instagram who post videos of them tilling their own land, growing their own food. They don't make it about race. They don't say, oh, we're doing this because of Black excellence. No. They are doing what God has designed them to do, to have dominion over the earth and to subdue it, to be a man. Not in the name of Blackness, but because you have an obligation to be a man. I love seeing things like that. It turns my stomach when they make it about Blackness. Oh, I became a nurse. I'm twerking on IG. I got my medical license. Black excellence. Really? It's sickening. But you think that way. You think that everything that you do that's an achievement is Black excellence, when you've been told all your life that Black people are downtrodden, they can't achieve, they can't make it in America, they can't make it in this racist society. And so when you actually do something for yourself, you believe that you beat all the odds, you overcame all the obstacles that were thrown at you. Those obstacles are imaginary. They're imaginary. Nobody's checking for you like that. But you have Whoopi Goldberg, right? Who insist on taking all of these false doctors, these false physicians that Booker T. Washington spoke of, and insisting that they maintain their place on the proverbial historical pedestal of what we call Black history. And to the extent that you go after not the root, but the symptoms, you're denigrating Black people. You see what's going on here? Let's play some more. Folks, I know you're growing tired of the audio issues every time I try to play this video, but let's try to truck through. I think I figured out the issue, so bear with me here. Bear with me here. Don't your conscience ever bother you? Every time you hear my name, you'll be sorry, baby, yes you will. And then you're gonna hang your head in shame.
You come from a poor community.
Sure.
You know how hard it has been for people. Two things. You talk a lot about your Catholic faith, but the Catholic faith says we take in immigrants. We take in people who don't have or who are having a hard time. How do you justify both things?
So let me say first a couple things, Whoopi. So number one, the book is actually way less political than you might think if you were just watching this, because obviously we're getting into the issues of the day.
Right.
95% of the book is really not about politics. I kind of have to write about politics because I'm the vice president, but I want to answer your question.
Right.
So fundamentally, if you think about what is immigration enforcement, immigration is law enforcement. It's somebody who has broken a law. A law enforcement officer has to show up and enforce that law. Now, inherently, sometimes that process is not always going to be pretty if you capture a video clip of it, in the same way that if you arrest somebody for committing a violent or a nonviolent crime, sometimes it's not always pretty. What I'm saying is the Catholic faith is actually I think it strikes the right balance here. It says the Christian faith, I think this is true of Protestants and Catholics, that you can have borders.
Yeah.
You're allowed to enforce your borders. That means the law enforcement piece of it. But you also have to take certain precautions and certain care, okay? And again, your argument is fundamentally, Whoopi, you're saying that we don't strike the right balance. I disagree with you about how we apply that, but nobody hopefully is saying we're not allowed to have a border.
No,
What I'm saying is that in order for us to actually enforce the law, you can't set a standard that says you're not allowed to deport anyone unless they've committed a violent crime. You've got to enforce the law equally and justly.
Let me do my follow-up.
You don't have to raise your hand,
Let me do my follow-up.
Yes, I do.
Because you were talking about people. What did Black people do to this administration that has allowed it to really stigmatize folks of color? And you know how hard it is. You have folks of color in your family.
Sure.
So when you see, things, the Emmett Till stuff coming down, or them doing all kinds of removal of information of Black heroes, how does that sit with you?
Well, what exactly are you talking about, Whoopi? Because you just
I know
Emmett Till was
I
Emmett
can
Till was
tell
the
you all
kid.
the stuff. Yeah.
No, I want to know what she's.
You don't know what I'm
respond
talking
to your
about.
actual point.
So in a lot of the museums, there's so many. Where they're taking down the actual history that happened in this country. Slavery happened. All kinds of stuff happened. And it seems that it has been very easy for this administration to remove that, and also to denigrate Black folks who have worked their behinds off to get this American dream. How do you, you know better.
So Sonny, that was actually a very helpful intervention, because I think the story you're talking about is where, allegedly the administration is holding back the appointments of people based on skin color. I've seen the story.
I'm talking about a host of things. I'm talking about Black history getting erased from public spaces. Black voter districts are being dismantled. Black leaders are being sidelined from our ranks. Where do Americans of color fit in this vision? Because it doesn't seem like we fit.
I think, Sonny, my view,
And if I may, since October of last year, there's been something like 6,668 refugees allowed into the country. All but 3 were white South Africans.
So
Okay, can you hear me? Type yes if you can hear me, please. Can you hear me? I just see one person to write yes. I got 500 people here. One of y'all can write yes. Okay, good. So, sorry for making y'all watch all of that again. I know we already covered the first half of that, but you saw now that Sonia Hostin entered the chat, and so too did that Cuban girl. I forget her name. Who says she's a Republican? I don't know if she still says she is, but so you have the two of them. And Sonny says it's not just about blocking colored people from certain appointments, right? Which there's an explanation for, and is not actually even accurate. It's also about getting rid of the history. And then she asks the question, where's the place for us in this administration? Where's the place for us? Not just in this administration, but in America, right? And part of the reason why The View is still on the air, right? Part of the reason why The View is still on the air is because of exactly that kind of emotionalism that's not rooted in substance. It's not rooted in facts. It's not that kind of show, even though they talk a lot about politics, but it's certainly not that kind of show, right? But that kind of emotionalism for a lot of women and men, for that matter, it works. It works, right? It works. Where is the place for colored people in America? When you see the taking down of the history, never mind the fact, once again, that these were the same women who were radio silent, if not all out celebratory of the tearing down of Confederate statues in the 2010s. Just downright celebratory. They cheered it on. But, you know, they expect us to take them seriously this time around when they clutch their pearls about the erasure of what they call Black history, but is really Marxist history. I want to keep beating that dead horse because it needs beaten. Because a lot of people don't know that it's dead. That's why I'm going to keep beating it. But that's a horse that needs beaten. Right? And so they expect us to be upset with them, to be outraged with them, and so on and so forth, because they're erasing Black history. So she asked the question, where's the place for colored Americans in America? Where's the place for colored Americans in this administration? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. These people, they ignore Manning Johnson, they ignore Booker T. Washington, they ignore George Washington Carver, they ignore Joseph H. Jackson. I think I said Joseph H. Jackson. They ignore all of the colored men and women who, by their merit, did great things, invented great things, not in the name of their Blackness. They simply utilized a skill or a talent that they had that was effective in the betterment of their lives, their children's lives, and depending on how innovative they were, the lives of others as well. But guess what? It's not just colored Americans who make up that innovative class. It's mostly made up of white people. Let's just call a spade a spade. It's mostly made up of white people because America is mostly made up of white people. Included in that class is also Hispanics and Irishmen and Italians and so on and so forth. But it's mostly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And this is just a fact. You can get mad at it all you want, but it's just a fact. But yes, there are blacks that are in that innovative class as well. But they ignore them and they place all the focus on the activists, the revolutionaries, the Marxists. They call that exclusively Black history. And to the extent that you don't agree with it, that means you're not making place for any colored American in American society. That's what Sonia Hostin is doing at bottom. And she's appealing to the emotion. Where's the place for us? And then, of course, you have that Cuban girl, the Republican, who chimes in. She enters the chat now. And she says, well, you know, out of so many immigrants that were let in between this time and that time, all but 3 of them were white South Africans. First of all, that's not true. And secondly, I mean, are we forgetting the fact that, I mean, are we forgetting what's actually going on in South Africa? The usurpation of land that's owned by whites in South Africa. Like they're literally confiscating land owned by white South Africans. I mean, this is just a fact. And last I checked, although I have to admit, I'm not super versed on this, but the government in South Africa was just showing face to some degree, but not actually doing anything about it. So people are fleeing for their lives, and that's, you know, that's an actual atrocity. It would stand to reason why we would let so many South African refugees in. I mean, it makes sense to me. But what tends to happen is you get these people who say, well, what about these refugees? And what about these people, you know, seeking refuge from this? I'm not sure what happened there. For some reason, like the browser just decided to refresh all of a sudden. I didn't press anything. Y'all saw I didn't press anything. I was looking here, talking to y'all, but I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, so again, we have an electoral process. We have we have 2 term limits on our presidents, each term consisting of 4 years. If you don't like the way that Trump is doing things or who he's deciding to take seriously in terms of refugee status, then you have the ability to replace him with somebody else the next time around. That's just the way that goes. And if you believe the numbers that the Cuban girl gives in terms of how many South Africans were able to be allowed in relative to others, if you believe what she's saying and you believe that proves Trump's racism, I would just invite you to look into those numbers to see if they are factual before you just run with it. Tonight's show is not about that. So I'm not going to get too heavy into it right now, but the heck is going on? But what I wanted to focus on primarily this evening was this tendency of the Sonia Hostin types, the Whoopi Goldberg types, to collapse what they call Black history, which is really Marxist history, with the integrity and the identity of colored people themselves. It's a lie. It's just a flat out lie. So I'll leave it there. And while I have time, looks like I have some time here, I can answer some super chats and whatever questions you guys have. I think that the technical difficulties tonight have to do with a number of things. Let me just talk about that for a brief moment. So right now I'm streaming on StreamYard, which I've been complaining about forever and have yet to switch over to a different platform. So there's that. Number two, I'm streaming on a Chromebook, and I'm not real familiar with a Chromebook. I'm typically dealing with Apple products. For a long time, I've had a MacBook. I have a Mac Studio in the house. I have, I'm more familiar with that. So this Chromebook situation is a little bit jumbled up. It's a little bit convoluted for me. And you tap one thing and something happens that you didn't intend to happen. And it's just very sketchy, like the StreamYard in conjunction with the Chromebook. Maybe I'm just making excuses. I don't know. So with the audio and everything, I don't know if that's related, but I know it probably made for a poor viewing experience tonight. So do forgive me for that. Let's see. We had a super chat from, oh, really? Says Chad, you've been muted for 10 minutes, bro. Thank you for the super in spite of that situation. I'm going to have to go back and cut that out. I don't know if it's possible to do that. And then Rain Me, $10, says, I ask sincerely, how can this be fixed and who can fix this division? That's a really good question. That's a really good question. The unfortunate answer is that it's not going to be changed by means of collectivism. In other words, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that question, right? Outside of a mass revival or something of that magnitude, something of that nature, in order to roll back the tide of this revisionist history, which we are now trying to correct with correctionist history, it's going to have to happen in one person at a time, one household at a time. I know as far as the MLK project is concerned, I've said this a number of times, but since we released episode 1 on into today, there's been a number of educators, school administrators who have reached out to me via email and have told me that they're going to start incorporating some of the work that we've done with the MLK project into their curriculum. These are private schools saying this. There was one public school teacher even who said it, and loads of homeschool mothers. So I see the needle moving to some degree, to some respect. I see more and more influencers who are coming out and who are correcting bad history, Marxist history. So that means it's extending beyond what I am doing with my platform. Other people with bigger platforms or smaller platforms are doing it as well, who are correcting this history. And my hope, and I know I was a little animated tonight. I don't tend to be very animated. I tend to try to approach issues in a non-emotional way, just to present the facts for the facts, let the facts be the facts. And there's a lot of people who resonate with that. A lot of people who don't resonate with that. But to the extent that history is being corrected in this way, you're going to have people who push back. You're going to have people who get outraged. You're going to have people who further muddle the waters by doubling down and quadrupling down and so on. That's kind of par for the course. But I can tell you that when it comes to the things that I'm doing on my particular platform, that even though I do get a lot of flack, that flack is overshadowed by the number of people who are, wishing me well, or who say that they're learning things, or they're taking things that I've said and that I've uncovered, and they ran with it and did research and were able to find out more information than what I presented, and so on and so forth. And so it's having a positive effect. But when you realize that the way that we've got here wasn't overnight, it was an incremental and gradual trajectory that took over 100 years, it will probably take just as much time to roll it back. So I don't know if that leaves any hope. For me, it does, because the way that I see it as a believer, as a Christian, is that I occupy this suit, this body suit, this flesh suit, for only a temporary amount of time. My soul is eternal. It's bought and paid for by Christ. Heaven is my eternal home. While I'm on this side of heaven, I want to do good. I want to make my Father happy. I want to receive the blessing of well done, right? And sometimes I can get away in the way of that. I perhaps got in the way of that tonight with just being overly animated, or whatever the case may be. And I ask for God's forgiveness in that, and your forgiveness if I offended you or anyone else. But for me, I want to kind of cut through the noise, cut through the nonsense, deliver the facts for what they are, help people to understand that there is an agenda at play that seeks, like the devil, to still kill and destroy you, to get you to be a participant in the building of something that's not heaven, and the building of a kingdom that is not of God, by way of politics, by way of activism. They might call it Christianity. They might use, scripturally or, Christian sounding language to get people to get behind what it is they're doing. But the Bible tells us to test every spirit to see if it's of God. The Bible says to test every spirit to see if it's of God. And we read in Ephesians 5:11, not to partake in the works of darkness, but to expose them. That is our job, to do that as the remnant, right? And so by turning the tide, like if I were to get everybody in America to be anti-communist, the job is not done, because communism is not, the final boss, as it were, right? So long as you have people in the flesh who are contriving in the name of any ism, not just communism, to the extent that you have the ability to mass communicate, those airwaves will always be filled with propaganda that aims to steal, kill, and destroy, right? So the work is never finished, but the fact is we have an obligation to preach the gospel, to preach Christ and him crucified, and also to warn the flock against the wolves, basically, against those who seek to do the bidding of the devil. It really boils down to that. There are people who did that before me. There are many people who are doing it now besides me. And there will be people who are doing it long after I'm dead and gone. If my name is not remembered on the earth by loads of people, if I don't have the #1 podcast or whatever the case may be, none of that matters. What does matter is that your name, my name, is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's the most important one to be remembered by, right? So we correct the history. We warn against the wolves. We preach the gospel to the flock. We do so with joy, right? When we talk about Whoopi Goldberg and Sunny Halston and all these other people, we do so not because we're afraid of them. We do so to add context, to correct the confusion, because a lot of us are distracted and say, look, when they talk about, history is being erased and Black people, there's no place for us. This is doom and gloom. This is a lie. And those who tell the lie are children of their father, who is the father of lies. This isn't an assignment or a calling for people to become the best patriot you can be, the best American you can be, the best capitalist you can be. It's none of that. It is a call, rather, to stop being emotionalized and led astray by those who are using rhetoric to cause such an effect in you, and to get back to that place from which you've fallen, from which I've fallen, from which we've fallen. That's what the calling is. Sure, we live in a country where we are told from the time we come out of the chute that we are a democracy. We're not a democracy, but that's what we're told. We're told that, you know, so many people fought for your right to vote, and it's your right to vote, and this is your country, and you have to da 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 da. And what that does is it gives you the impression that you can make a heaven on earth, that you can build your proverbial Tower of Babel, as it were. And so we get so emotionally tied up in it that unless and until I get my way, nothing will ever be right. That's kind of the tragedies of a constitutional republic in so many respects. Constitutional republic is good in so many ways, but you can easily fall into the trap of believing that we can, by way of politics, build a utopia, right? It's built in the language, make for a more perfect union, and da 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 da. This isn't a kind of pessimistic or nihilistic way of saying don't vote or don't be involved in politics or whatever the case may be. I invite people to practice their civic duty, but to do so with discernment, and to do so with the proper head on your shoulders, knowing and understanding that this is not the end all to be all, right? Regimes will change, powers will change. The pendulum will continue to swing, but you must be principled. You must have your feet sure-footed in the word of God. That's your obligation. That is your duty. And we mustn't worry our pretty little heads, although it's hard to do so, about how many lives we're affecting. We can only see things from a horizontal view, from a ground level view. We can't see the bird's eye view. We can't see all things. We're not omniscient. I'm not omnipresent. We're not, omnipotent. Only God is. And the Bible talks of his word as the rain that goes out and achieves its purposes, and it doesn't return to him void. So long as we're being, obedient and faithful, we can leave the rest to God and know that he will do with it what he sees fit, what he pleases. So yeah, that's a fascinating question. It's an important question. But for me, on the other side of the question is peace in Christ. I don't mean to preach at anybody tonight, but this is something that I think we all need to be reminded of. So let us move on. Let us move on. Don't your conscience ever bother you every time you hear my name? Well, try to think of all that I've been through and hang your head in shame. All right, so let's see here. All right, we got a super sticker. No, this is a super chat. $50 from Devon Stone. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Great work, man. Keep going. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I really do. You know the nighttime is the right time to be with the one you love now. I said, oh, baby. I said, come on, baby, now. I want you to hold my hand. Yeah, as tight as you can. Oh, no, the nighttime. Whoa, is the right time to be with the one you love. All right. We got another one from Proman, 1926. As a Black Gen Xer, you don't know how important your work is. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the super chat. Darling, let me hold you. Dun-dun-dun. Okay, let's see. So, baby, my girl. Mm-mm. And girl, I give you all I got to give. Okay, let's see. Okay, got another one from Krista Legine. Krista Legine, $5. Here late, Whoopi looked totally clueless when Vance asked a simple question. She couldn't think on her feet without her script. Why is media so empty? Yeah, I mean, the thing is, unfortunately, they have determined that most people who watch daytime television are not interested in substance. They just want to be entertained. The fact is, people will click off. People will switch the channel if you start talking about substance, start having a substantive conversation. That's the theory, though. I don't know how true that theory is, because people watch long form content on a daily basis that deal with substance. There's a lot of podcasters who I know of who easily do 2-3 hour podcasts that gets through and under and above various topics in a very intricate way. And you look at the views, they have hundreds of thousands of views. So there definitely is a hunger for it, but people go seeking for that. You know, people go looking for that kind of thing. If you're watching daytime television, on the other hand, it's a different animal. It's something that you can just sit down on a lazy afternoon, flip the channels and be entertained by. You have so many different options. And so you're competing with a lot of low vibrational content, a lot of low vibrational information. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that that there just isn't a lot of substance. I mean, even on PBS is one of the channels that's supposed to actually go substantively into information, into conversations, but they are heavy and propagandizing one side of an argument. And to the extent that they do that, it's not even, accurate most of the time. They are guilty of constantly straw manning their political adversaries and using emotion, once again, like The View, to get people to see things the way that they see them. So that's just television for you. That's unfortunate. Why tell them that it's human nature? Why do they do me that way? If this is why. All right, so I think that's it. Do we have any more comments? Let's see. I've been looking at the supers. I don't know if we have any. Oh yeah, y'all are commenting. I didn't see that there were actually comments coming through. I thought there were only supers. Da 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 da. I like living this way. I like loving this way. So reaching out across the nighttime. See that girl? She knows I'm watching. She likes the way I stare. Ooh, tell them why does it do me that way? All right, look, we got another super. Let's see, from the Big Daddy Pod, $2. Thank you for that. It says, "Good thing you are a plumber and not a singer." Ha! That's funny. I own a plumbing company, but I don't do a lot of plumbing. My full-time job as of now is filmmaking. They say hi. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut off. It's 8:30, but I do appreciate all y'all for listening to me ramble. I'll probably be back on Thursday evening to talk about the next thing. The MLK Project is available. The whole series is available, seasons 1 and 2, at chadojackson.com. We're working on four documentaries. We have 4 documentaries that are being cooked up right now. I can't wait to share. I can't wait to share the trailers. We are about to undergo an extensive fundraising process for those documentaries, so it might be a while before you see some of the trailers because we got to get them funded and created and all that good stuff. But I can't wait to share the titles with you all as well. These are going to be some hard hitters, even more hard hitting than the MLK Project, I think. But the MLK Project definitely needed to be released. That's something that the people definitely needed to see and understand. And especially since January 31st, 2027, we're told that the MLK files are supposed to be released. Of course, the MLK files that were released last year were, those were files that had to deal more with the assassination of King, not so much the communist ties and the philandering and everything else that King was involved in. So these files, this batch in 2027, are supposed to deal with that. So, of course, throughout the rest of this year, you'll probably see more people who are doing deep dives into King. And then on the other side, you'll see people who are trying to get ahead of the media storm, such as they have been doing for the last 50 years, by gradually saying, well, we are, none of us are perfect. Everybody who among us are not guilty of having vice and fault. We shouldn't focus on anything negative that King did. We should focus on the good things that he did. We should focus on the positivity that he spread. Right. And I think we do a pretty sufficient job on the MLK Project to expose the quote unquote good things that King did for not being good at all, but for being detrimental. So, yeah, if you're interested in watching the MLK Project and haven't seen it yet, then please go do that. Looks like we got some more last minute supers. Did I already read this one? No, I didn't. American Man 845 says, have you had any wealthy Black help fund projects? Have you had any wealthy Blacks help fund projects? Yes, I have, actually. I have. In fact, the MLK Project, we got a pretty sizable donation when we were raising money from the rapper Waka Flocka Flame, of all people. And there are others who are lesser known. But yes, we've had wealthy colored people help fund the MLK project. So thankful for them. Let's see. We got another one from Rain Me, $10. Did I already read this one? I can't. Okay. I asked sincerely how. Okay, yeah, you already answered that one. So the delay in every time I pull up a super chat and read from it has to do with the fact that when I pull it up on the screen, there's this big black bar that blocks the text, and I have to wait for that text to go away before I can read the super. So let's see. Did I already read this one? Okay, yeah, I already read that one. So then I got one more. Looking in my mirror caught me by surprise, and I'm so glad I found you, girl. Can't help it if I wanted to, wouldn't help it even if I could. Da, 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 da. Da. Okay, we got one for $10 from Connie Harris. Says, are we able to buy the MLK episodes already released? Yes. So the entire season, the entire series, is already released. Season 1 has 8 episodes. Season 2 has 12 episodes. If you want to buy the episodes individually, you can do that on Patreon, which you can get access to by going to chadojackson.com. Under the Where to Watch tab, there's 3 options. One's Patreon, another is Vimeo on demand, and another is to buy the DVD. The Vimeo option only allows you to buy the entire season. You can buy season 1 or season 2. The Patreon option, however, I don't really like Patreon. It's a very clunky website, but the Patreon option is, and I'm going to do better with Patreon. I'm going to spend a lot of time to make Patreon, at least my Patreon page, less clunky than it already is. I'm going to go in and clean up a lot of stuff, separate live streams from the series, seasons 1 and 2, and then I'm going to have another folder categorized for just deleted scenes. But on Patreon, as it stands now, you can buy the episodes individually, right? So as it stands right now, while I'm on this subject, we are recouping the cost that it took to make the MLK project. That's why it costs money to watch it. It's behind a paywall. The idea is before long to be able to release all of the episodes for free so people can watch them, because I want people to have the information. But it costs money to make, so I have to put it behind a paywall. And so I'm not saying that that's going to happen anytime soon. It's going to happen eventually, maybe in the next 2 or 3 years. But right now, we're just trying to recoup the cost. That's why it costs money. So for every one of you who are buying the MLK project, it means so much. You're helping independent cinema. You're helping me as an independent filmmaker to make more films. Like I said, we have 4 other documentaries that we're making. Some of the money that went toward the revenue for the MLK project, some of the money that we received are going into those projects. We'll be raising more money for those other 4 projects as well. So yeah, huge appreciation for all of you who bought the MLK project. All right. So we'll call it a night. Thank you all for watching. Love y'all and God bless.